Welcome back to Patriot Network TV. This is part 3 of our response to the absolute evil done in Connecticut. And in part 3, I want to spend a little more time with the facts. I want to refer you to Professor John Lott, L-O-T-T. Lott is most famous for a book that he published and has updated repeatedly, and it's called More Guns Equal Less Crime. In every statistical, empirical, fact-based study where we give citizens the right to arm themselves, we give them concealed carry, we give them stand your ground, anywhere where we do that, guess what happens? Crime drops. Because the criminals, in an economic sense and in a market sense, make a rational choice about where to victimize people. You don't go, if the marketplace tells you that everybody's got their Ruger Super Red Hawk loaded with black talons, you're not going to show up there. If the market says every person has their AR-15 with 2,000-3,000 rounds and they've got 30 clip magazines, and even if they haven't been to the range in a while, they can put that red dot on them and defend themselves, you say, gee, I want to go somewhere else to victimize. Even if you're down to holding them off with your Gerber or holding them off with your Camflo, you've got a much better chance of keeping them away from you than if you're a good left-winger with that big sign in the front yard. That's my favorite all-time sign, is the guy's got the sign pointing to his neighbor saying, my neighbor's totally opposed to guns, rob him first because you'll get shot when you come through my door. What's the other great, that door's there for your protection. You don't seem to understand that. But I would ask you to read the research published in the peer-reviewed literature by John Lott, and I would ask you to empirically, factually analyze what's going on. Now, it's important to realize that the American left doesn't have the ability to win this argument if it's based on the facts. And by the way, that's true across the board. If you look at any of the major issues where the American left is gaining in polling, they do it by lying, or they play to emotions. There is no empirical evidence of global warming. Over the last 20 years, global mean temperature has gone down, not up, while CO2 increased by over 30%. And, not to mention that atmospheric CO2 was 22 times higher in the recent geologic past, and on and on and on. But there's no argument that the left can win in America by arguing the facts, not a single one. And they, to quote Rahm Emanuel again, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. They want to dance on the dead bodies of these children in Connecticut to get gun control. And gun control is not about guns, it's about control. The taxation of the wealthy is not about the ability to have quote-unquote fairness. The top 10% of federal income tax filers in America earn less than 30% and pay more than 78% of the total federal income tax burden. It's not about tax fairness. That's not at all what it's about. It's about forcing people to pay off the federal government to be left alone. And this entire gun control debate boils down to a problem that was caused by the American left, and specifically the American Civil Liberties Union. The reason that we have so many nuts, so many evil people who are literally clinically insane out on the street is that back in the 50s and the 60s, we had mental institutions where judges could send people and hold them. We could do 72 hours without any problem, hold them for observation and see if they were clinically insane. Now, by the way, back in the old days of the DSM, Diagnostic Service Manual of the American Psychiatric Association, American Psychology Association, the manual said that insanity was the inability to act in a way that's appropriate to this situation. If you walk into the theater in Aurora and start shooting people, that's insanity. If you walk into the school in Connecticut after putting 3 bullets in your mom's face with her own gun, that's insanity. In the old days, we used to have mental institutions. When I was in college in Montana, you were required as part of your undergraduate, today we call it service learning, you were required to spend time working at the state home, and this is how long ago I was an undergraduate, the state home for the mentally retarded, the state home for the insane, and at the Deer Lodge, down in Deer Lodge at the state prison. And when you went to those facilities, you saw things that were shocking. And they were shocking because they were total institutional facilities that took their freedom away and locked them up and kept them there for a number of reasons. And whether you went to Warm Springs, whether you went to Boulder, whether you went to Deer Lodge, you saw people who had been deprived of their freedom. But the reason they'd been deprived of their freedom was that they were a danger to themselves and others. In the modern world, thanks to the ACLU, you can't be made, if you're schizophrenic, we can't force you to take your meds. My father's a federal judge, and he has a case that haunts him to this day. And I don't want to go into too many of the particulars of the case because it's not, you know, it is not good to speak out of turn on this, but I will tell you that my father is a very honorable man, and he takes his oath of office very, very seriously. And when he was appointed to the federal bench, it was a giant day of ascendancy for him, and it was the fulfillment of a lifelong dream to do more for his country and more for his fellow citizens. Well, he had a series of cases where there were people who were federal agents who were harmed on federal lands by people who had mental illness. And in one particularly horrible case, there was a man who refused to take his meds, went onto federal land and killed a federal officer. Clearly a federal crime, but also under the McNaughton rule, the failure to appreciate the difference between right and wrong at the time of the crime, he was quote unquote insane. Now the problem was when he went to the mental institution and was given the drugs, forced to take the drugs every day, then he was sane. Once he was sane, he could no longer be held, but he also couldn't be tried for the murder of the federal agent. So eventually what happened after the ACLU intervened, they forced this man to be released from the care of the doctors. He got off his meds, he went back onto federal land, and he killed another federal agent. To this day, my father's haunted by the fact that the law has been perverted to stop him from doing what is just and correct to protect other federal officers working on federal land from people who are insane. Now, the ACLU doesn't care about that. The American Civil Liberties Union is not the least bit concerned. They don't lose any sleep over it because they are an absolutist organization. That's why they'll go to court and sue to allow Nazis to march in Skokie, Illinois, which at the time had the highest percentage of Holocaust survivors in the United States. It's a principle. No, it's not a principle. When the winds of injustice blow, where will you stand? When the winds of injustice blow, where will you stand? The American Civil Liberties Union stands firmly with the KKK. They stand firmly with the insane who refuse to take their medication. They stand firmly with the schizophrenic who's violent and does not want to take his meds. And they put the rest of us in harm. If you look at the shootings in Aurora, if you look at these shootings in Connecticut, at the base is not guns. At the base is mental illness and the mainstreaming, quote unquote, the mainstreaming of mentally ill people, that is dumping them on the street. And if you look, you don't have to look any further than someone like Geraldo Rivera, who cut his journalistic teeth with the Titicut Follies, exposing the horrible conditions at the Titicut Mental Institution in New York. Well, was the situation there horrible? You bet. Was it awful? You bet. But you know what didn't happen? You didn't have people showing up at schools with their dead mother's guns that had been legally purchased and murdering 20 children so that they would be on the news and they could break it off on everybody else and be famous for their 15 seconds. This episode shows you three central things. 1, there's evil in the world. 2, man's laws cannot prevent evil. And 3, an armed populace is the only answer. The teacher and the principal who lunged at, threw themselves into the bullets of the madman, had they been armed in any way, shape, or form, they would have stopped him before he killed 20 children and 6 adults. I want you to think long and hard about what is the correct way to meet evil. You can go lay in front of Hitler's tanks, but you'll have a lot of people squished by Hitler's tanks. I would rather face Hitler with my AR-15 than I would by laying down in front of his tanks. It's something for you as a free citizen to consider. Are you indeed endowed by your Creator with inalienable rights that no one may take away from you and that you may not transfer away? And is that primary right the right to keep and bear arms? I certainly hope so. God bless you. God bless the United States.